Video games like Postal.
Going postal.
Going postal. New video game. It's called Postal.
There are a lot of people that really wish we would go away, but it's never going to happen.
Their whole premise is so over the top. It's so ridiculous.
There was a video game called Postal. We just ran around shooting people.
Oh, this is going to piss off your viewers, isn't it? Oh, well.
Going Postal, The Legacy Foretold. A new documentary about the history of running with scissors. Streaming this spring. Pre-order now. Go to goingpostaldoc.com. That's goingpostaldoc.com. Tell them In the Keep sent you. To will, to dare, to know, to be silent. If you want to keep something sacred, keep it in the silence of your heart. The 4 rules of the White Magician. Yahuwah. All right, so Barry Fitzgerald, you are a world-famous paranormal researcher, ghost hunter, diviner of strange things, a charm stealer. I assume that has something to do with something I don't know about yet, but I'm looking forward to finding out. I grew up watching you on television with my mom, so that was like always kind of dormant in the background. And to be honest, I always thought of ghost hunting TV shows as sort of like the WWE version of ghost hunting, because then I saw her in real life doing more interesting things than what I was seeing on television. So I want to pick your brain about that as well.
Sure. Yeah.
But tell us about yourself and what you're doing these days.
Well, I've been investigating the paranormal now in all its splendor for over 35 years now. Mm. So I suppose for most part, it's half of my lifetime doing this. And part of that, as you rightfully pointed out, that was with GHI, Ghost Hunters International, on Sci-Fi Channel. And with that, we traveled the world looking for various different phenomena. And I have to say, it's one thing to have the cameras with you, but it's another thing when the cameras are switched off and how the phenomena can mess with you in those instances. But having left that particular field, and whenever I came back to Ireland, I really wanted to delve into the mythology and the folklore of the land. Really, it was a drive to, I suppose, rescue some of our youth from the PlayStations and the Xboxes and plug them back into this reality. And it was an exploration to see if anything of the old ancient myth and folklore still existed today. And I was surprised. And I have had instances, Tyler, whenever I met these things out there, and they scared the bejesus out of me. I can remember one instance on the Island of the Dead, and I said to my co-author, I said, if that ever happens again, I'm done. I don't want any part of that. Okay. And that experience on the Island of the Dead was enough to lift me off the railway tracks that I was on and set me on a new course. And that has been one hell of a roller coaster. And now we've set a company in the UK called Awakening Events, and we're planning a series of expeditions. We executed an expedition last year in Spain, up in the Pyrenees, and that was with under the auspices of Project Doorway, which is examining the ancient associations with a lot of this phenomena, stripping away the external masks in which we interpret it, and look for clues of where to find this stuff whenever we're out in the landscapes. And that was a phenomenal experience. There was things there that we captured I have never ever seen before. And with awakening events, we have a growing number of members within that particular company. So we are presenting to our members in May the findings, because they're first. It's the members that get the access to the information first, and then they will also have an opportunity to come with us on the next expedition. And that really is dependent on where the previous expedition was leading us. So we just have no idea where on earth we're going until the investigations are done. And it's been a phenomenal experience. If not, I have to say, physically demanding, spiritually demanding, because there was 3 of us on the initial expedition to Spain, and all 3 of us got whacked. And some of us are still recovering from that. And it has taken a long time to get over that interaction physically,
Right.
from our own health perspectives. So it's been a unique experience. And of course, I was writing the books there, and my last book was the Deceptions of Gods and Men,
Right.
and with Brian Allen. And I had written a subsequent book, which was the secondary, the part 2 of that particular perspective. And I'm having serious considerations about that one, because uh, I'm I have it written and it's sitting on the shelf, and I think that's probably where it's going to stay. Um, it's just I don't know how to explain it. I don't think we're ready for that yet. So I think it'll stay there. And who knows, maybe after I head for the pearly gates at the end of my time, the wife will maybe cash that in.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a pot boiler
Go, yeah, yeah.
for sure. I think that's so that alone is very interesting, because we commonly have these conversations about, what does military intelligence already know that they've decided we're not ready for. And I worked in the Air Force for quite a long time. I was a weather forecaster for the entire western side of the United States and South America.
A lot
So
of
I
responsibility.
had uh, several radars in the vicinity of Area 51. And of course, we're not supposed to talk about that kind of thing. But what I did observe was a lot of strange things on the radar. And I would call to Creech Air Force Base and I would say, "Hey, what's that on the radar? Is that a thunderstorm?" And they'd say, "No, I don't know what that is." But I'm like, "Well, do you want me to put out the thunderstorm warning?" And they would say, "No, don't see anything. I'm looking in that direction. There's nothing over there." Then I would call Nellis Air Force Base.
Yeah.
"You guys see that on the radar between you and Creech?" "Yep." "Do you want me to put out the thunderstorm warning?" "Nope."
Yeah.
"Okay."
Yeah.
And it would appear to be, like a low-lying, very dense cloud form. And it's pretty obviously they fly over with a plane and drop chaff out of the back of the plane so that they can do whatever they're going to do there without anyone being able to see it on the radar.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which, that's the extent of what I know about what's going on there. But that really opened my eyes. I'm like, yeah, we definitely have things that we don't want everyone to know about. And there's
Well, that's it. And you raise a good point there, because a lot of folks, and God love them, they want it to be alien. They want it. They need it to be alien. When the truth of the matter is, a huge majority of it is ours. And I think New Jersey is a perfect example of that.
Yep.
And seeing the contracts that were going out and being awarded to Lockheed Martin and the rest, and where they were allowed to test these new drones, which was in New Jersey, in that particular airspace and everything else, and the other bases that were associated with that. But you know, that's not to take away from amazing technology that we're working on.
Right.
It's absolutely staggering where we're going. But we shouldn't lose sight that in, what was it, the 1970s, I think it was, that there were already contracts being established that wanted to mimic the original UFO encounter.
Right.
That also included sight, sound, smell, and also reaction, causing a reaction within our own fight or flight. So all of these were being catered for. But I think we shouldn't lose sight in the fact that it's a mimic of the original. So there's already something there beforehand that we're copying, which I think in itself, it stands us to credit that, yes, we know that there's something else there. It's how do we disseminate and remove the noise from and get to the source of the original phenomena. And that is where Project Doorway goes.
So tell me a little bit more about Project Doorway and what you're working on.
Well, Project Doorway, really what it has been doing is looking at these key areas and using our satellites to target specific areas. Um, where you tend to find hotspots of phenomena. And this phenomena can be widespread. It can be UFO phenomena. It can be cryptid. It can be poltergeist phenomena. Usually all in the same spots. Missing people, disappearance, strange disappearances. All of this is all keyed together. And a lot of our work, strangely enough, crosses over neatly into the likes of David Paulides and his books that he does within the US, Missing 411. Because the key areas that he sees the people disappearing are the key areas that we would also be looking at using the satellite data.
You know, Lon Strickler, he's
I'm not familiar with that.
Phantoms and Monsters writer, but he's been detailing winged cryptids for years, and his website, he's constantly putting on like all these sites where you'll see these hotspots of like, for whatever reason, the last 10 or so years, there have been thousands of winged cryptid sightings near Chicago, Illinois, right? Or just in that area. But these things, as you've pointed out in several other interviews that I've heard you say, these things happen seemingly like it's connected to a specific area and then it spreads. And it'll not just be one thing; it'll be lots of things. I mean, Skinwalker Ranch, all this sort of stuff. But they're all over the world: St. Petersburg, New Orleans, wherever it happens to be, in the desert of the Southwest as well.
Well, what we tend to see with the satellite data is that the northern hemisphere have smaller pockets of this phenomenon, but much more. The southern hemisphere has larger pockets, but less of them.
It's also true for weather phenomena.
Oh, is it? I didn't know that. Oh, there you go.
Yeah. So if you're measuring weather over a large area, you will usually you'll want to look at things in terms of anomalies. Like, is this anomalously hot, anomalously cool, etc. And you'll see in the northern hemisphere we have more landmass, so there's going to be more heat anomalies than there are in the south, and heat anomalies are generally associated with severe weather. So you do have severe weather in the southern hemisphere, but not nearly as much, and also not nearly as much that affects human beings as you do in the northern hemisphere.
Well, certainly from our perspective, leading on from using the satellite data, we are also tied it into rocks. A lot of this phenomenon, if not all of the phenomena, is associated with appearing on, in, or above rock formations in various different contexts.
Right.
And that has intrigued us. And again, this is an aspect of Project Doorway, looking at these key areas where the phenomena passes from us to somewhere else, and usually it's through the rock. That has been an intriguing experience. Now, as to why we're looking at rocks and why the phenomena is coming through that, it's open for speculation. But a lot of the work that I've been doing, I know a lot of folks will be saying, "Well, this is interdimensional." I wouldn't be quick to say that. I would say no. My work is suggesting that this is here,
right.
And is not coming from somewhere else. It's here.
There, in the old geomantic texts and stuff, you'll read a lot of things about the different types of rock having different, ability to work as a conduit for something spiritual. Yeah. So like limestone may have a different effect than something like basalt. And a lot of ancient temples and stuff are built around basalt deposits. I've also noticed that.
They are, yeah. And when we go back and we start looking at a lot of the ancient texts
Mm.
It speaks of being able to contact the gods through unhewn rocks,
Right.
as rocks that were not carved or anything like that.
Mm.
Just rough and ready rock formations, cliff faces, all of this. You went there to project your intentions, your connections to whatever was on the other side, whatever was answering. And I find myself here in Ireland, on top of a mountain, in January, and this has a secret worship site in it, and it's a very ancient site. But it's nestled neatly in between two cliff faces. You won't see it unless you're actually standing on it. And this is a place that really demands me to go back and explore this further, to see and try and ascertain what were they communicating with and how. Because we can see how the ancient Neolithic were doing it. We've got huge stone chambers here in Ireland that predate the Great Pyramids of Giza. But these are rough and ready stones. And that's where we tend to see a lot of the phenomena appearing through. They come through those mounds and onto the landscape and into the air and things like that. And we see them retracting back to that as well.
So if not interdimensional and not extraterrestrial, you use the phrase that they're here already. What does that mean to you?
They're on the planet.
Okay. But we can't.
But not in the form that we think. We conceive it to be something my size. No, I'm looking at something very much smaller, minuscule, in fact. And that in itself taps into the new book, which is called Born to Serve. Yeah, that's another discussion for another day, I think. And we'll see with that book, if it ever decides to go anywhere. We'll see what happens.
Smaller though, like fairy size, like my thumb, like microbiomes.
Oh, you're really going small.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
To the point where we conceive that this idea of the soul and the spirit within the modern age, we see it very much intertwined. It's terminology which is interchangeable. It's the same thing. It's not. And this is something we have to recognize. The spirit was something very, very different, because within the soul, spirit, and body, you've got this triangulation. You've got this trinity, which is us. What I often hear, and I smile when I hear it, when people say, well, my soul, whenever I think of my soul and whatever the case may be, or I'm selling my soul to whatever deity comes along, you can't. It's not yours.
Right.
Why do you think it's yours? And so the premise of the book is looking at a possible symbiotic connection to something which was never ours.
Interesting. Speaking of souls and such things, and possessions are always a fun topic to talk about. I caught your appearance on Unsolved Mysteries with Don Phillips and Steve Marrow, and I'm sure you've probably been asked ad nauseum, but I have to for the sake of myself.
Well, believe it or not, I haven't been asked about it. So by all means, first.
Genuinely amazing that you've not. I was actually surprised by how quickly you responded to, like, "Hey, what's up?" I was like, "Man, this guy's really accessible." So, no, tell me about the whole experience with Don Phillips and what you thought of his situation.
Don's a good lad.
Yeah.
He displayed a talent which went beyond. Clearly, he had and possesses an ability which could have been very positive for him. But I wasn't necessarily interested in Don. I was interested in Becky.
Right.
I wanted to find out, who are you, or what are you?
For the sake of our audience, if you haven't seen the episode, pause and go watch it. But this gentleman is being used in a number of paranormal cases to solve mysteries, and he's very effective at it, or at least appears to be. And he attributes this to a woman who he believes died years ago in a plane crash,
Yeah, so
who speaks to him in his mind and tells him information. He doesn't attribute any of it to himself, which I find very interesting, because I feel like if you are yourself a conduit that one of these things, like Becky, can communicate with and occupy, you must have some natural skill or ability. But yeah, go ahead.
So I told Steve, bring him to Ireland and we'll test him. And I had selected 3 areas that we were going to test, 3 locations. He had no idea. Steve didn't know where he was going. The only person who knew where we were going was me.
Right.
And I kept that under a tight lip. But needless to say, Becky never appeared during the entire stay. Now, I'm not saying that. That was Dawn said that Becky is not here. I realized later the story changed. It was Becky was there.
Yeah.
Well, it's not what we were told. And we saw no display of Becky in Ireland at all. Another aspect to this, of course, as well, is that we researched the claims made by Becky about who she was and where she come from. They didn't exist. Now, when I see that, of course, then the alarm bells go off straight away. If these things have lied to you once, they will lie again and again and again. And we see a downward spiral begin to exist. And the corruption of the body and everything else will work itself around that, and the collapse of everything that we hold near and dear will disintegrate around that. Now, I haven't seen Don since he was in Ireland, but that's the way it was, and I stand true and faithful about what I said and what I believe Becky actually is. Becky is not angelic, not at all. And to understand angels, you have to understand that they didn't exist before 584 BC. So what is it we're calling on? There's an old Babylonian esoteric practice that was used when your property or your person was being plagued by lesser demons, if you like. You called in a bigger one. And that's exactly what I was saying happened. And we see that time and time again. Even in the modern age, we see that practice still cycle over, and over, because we don't question. We need to ascertain what on earth we are opening ourselves up to. And you know, if we don't do that, we're in the road to wreck and ruin. But that's all I can say about Dawn. Dawn had and has an absolute staggering ability. He displayed that clearly without Becky. So why did Becky not want to come and talk? Why did Becky not want to come to the room and discuss who she was or what she was? And this is something that we see within Project Doorway and everything else. We see this. The moment that you become suspicious, it's gone. It will not wait around to be found out.
Right.
The deal is not to be found out. Because if we find out what it is, then we shut down.
You're listening to KEEP in the Keep. Please take a moment to tell at least one other person how much you enjoy the show. That's right. Grab that link and send it to that buddy you're thinking of who you know would be interested in what we're talking about right now. Maybe post it somewhere. I know it seems scary, but you can do it. I believe in you. Don't hesitate to leave a comment and a 5-star review, a like, wherever you're listening. And if you want, Patreon supporters for this show get episodes early, access to our secret Discord channel, chances to suggest questions to our guests, our games, and whatever else I can do for you. Every little bit helps. This podcast directly supports my ability to do what I love and take care of my growing family. The link is in the show notes. Thank you, bless you, stay in the keep.
It's interesting. I've found in my own path that you will often, if you are someone who could confront such a thing, like if you bring even a symbol of it around, that it obscures itself, or it changes its story, because it's like, I don't want you to expose us to that. Similar, yeah, like how Gollum lies to Sam. He's like,
Yeah.
he's gonna throw stuff off the bridge or whatever, but like Sam, he's suspicious of us. We can't let him see this. Quite interesting. And you guys have encountered more cases like this through your research and Project
Oh,
Norway?
it's time and time and time again.
Yeah.
So much so that we're able to see a pattern.
Hmm.
And we see this aspect of oppression more often than not. But it's something that you can't really address these days, because everything now is labeled and pigeonholed and set off neatly within psychiatry, which modern psychiatry now has of no interest to the soul whatsoever. It's not repairing the soul. It's about creating profit. And it's that, unfortunately, is it's sedating the problem. It's not fixing the problem. And we've seen successes there within Denmark, within some of the psychiatry circles there, where instead of medicating the people, they communicate with it and say, okay, what are you? And they work through it. And the people come out the other end without the use of medication. And that has been interesting to see.
In Denmark.
In Denmark, yeah. But this is
I
also
lived there for 2 years. It was the most
correct.
secular place I'd ever seen in my life. It's interesting.
Yeah. And it's also interesting, that we see this particular type of practice as well within the native cultures, especially within the likes of the Amazon and things like that, where we see that the kids will come under, if they're selected, they'll come under extreme turmoil and spiritual oppressiveness and nature and everything else. And this is a course of which they have to go through. And I suppose they become shaman later on for the tribes and everything else. But what do we do with our shaman these days?
Oh, stick them in an asylum, put them on
There you
meds.
go.
Yeah.
There you go. And we have practices these days with folks that come along, and they're educated from someone else who's been educated by someone else who's been educated possibly by the internet or by some book that they've read, and they become practitioners in meditation. But what's not addressed these days is that 10% of people who go through mainstream meditation can actually have adverse effects and can last a lifetime with those people, because they're being presented there during the state of meditation. They're presenting themselves. They create this light around them, which attracts the phenomena.
Right.
But no one's telling them there's a possibility that this could happen. Instead, it's all New Age fluff and it's all love and light. It's not always love and light. And to be aware of that, I think, goes a long way. And we're not as quick to jump down that rabbit hole. It's interesting to hear about the new studies and experiments that are being done. Colorado is one of them, where they're trying to develop using DMT, this connection to the other side, to withdraw information for new technology development. This is something we have seen time and time and time again. And the Douglas Aeronautics company back in the 1960s were trying this, and they were using company money to try and pull information from this other side to develop, advanced engine designs. Well, did the engine designs come? No, not at all. There was nothing of any value that was brought forward, except the people that were taking part in the experiments. They all become open to it.
Right.
And this is a key factor, because it wants more. It wants more people to be brought in. And it'll spin them along and spit them out. And the aeronautics, I went through the company paperwork of the aeronautics company, and I was with a red marker. I was going, no. I could clearly see where they were being played, but they never copied. And that's my fear for these guys in Colorado, that they're setting themselves up for severe failure. And I would be very concerned for them, I'd be very worried for them. But that's the way it goes. That's what happens. And I did hear another story of the folks that were using DMT within their apartment to open a doorway to the other side.
Mm.
And from what I understand, they weren't too successful, but they failed to recognize that the people who lived directly underneath the apartment were being plagued by nighttime attacks that happened after they opened the doorway.
You tell me, Mr. Fairy researcher and folklore expert, what is it that they all claim that they're communicating with? And that's what I find very interesting. And it's universally true. They all see the same thing. They're all
They
having
do.
the yeah.
Yeah. A lot of it tends to be this. There's a reptilian aspect to it, and this is global. When you reach enough, when you reach that level of DMT that's being consumed, they all start seeing the same entity on the other side, which is intriguing. That it has this particular aspect, this reptilian aspect to it. Because we're all individuals. Why are we sharing this same hallucination, if you like, brought on by drugs?
Right.
That should not be the case. You know, we're all independent. We should all be seeing different things. But when there's a certain level met and consumed, then we start seeing the same thing. And Graham Hancock was a big driver, of course, for this. And but even for him, you know, the phenomena even acknowledged the fact that we've got you now. And I said, well, you've only got me for 7 minutes. But that's not always the case, because once they latch on, it's tough to get them to leave.
I find it very, very interesting how a lot of the New Age philosophies, like I'm reading right now, Liberation by Father Yod from the Source family in the 70s. And he was kind of like kind of one of the purveyors of this Age of Aquarius idea and everything. And he has some things that he says, and as always, that are like really wise, and then other things that I'm like, that's strange. So the first one is like he was pretty anti using drugs, but his explanation for this was like not that necessarily the singular experience of LSD is bad, but it's like if you are uninitiated, like if you don't know what the symbols you're receiving are, you're very easily tricked. And if you keep doing that to yourself and you don't know what you're doing or how to handle it, then you'll just end up whacked out of your brain, and just like you would if you were possessed by a demon or something like it. Whereas if you're, you know, really far along in your journey and you understand a lot of it, you could have that experience. It could be very enlightening for you. But this goes back to your idea that you presented earlier. You know, perhaps you are meditating and you're doing it in a healthy way, and you're opening yourself up to these things, and you can navigate that space and come back down to earth. Some people never come back down to earth; they just get lost. Right.
There's a you know, it's something that I've thought about before as well and looked into, because when you using chemicals such as DMT, especially if you smoke it, you are shot out of the body like a cannon.
Right.
Now, granted, it's only a short period of time. But what we should remember is that our gift of discernment, that psychic voice that we have from the soul, is planted within the body. So if we're detached from the body, we no longer have that gift of discernment. So what we're being shown, what we're being told, the majority of it can be BS.
Right.
And we go back and fill our shelves full of new age fluff that does nothing more than unhinge people and send them in different paths, which in itself can be potentially harmful for them. So we have to be responsible about our advancement within this particular field, and caution is the big key of the day. But by no means am I saying we shouldn't do it. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying we need to slow down a bit. We need to examine what's coming through. We need to analyze and understand what is being presented to us, what we're hearing, what we're seeing, and break that down to see if there's anything behind it which would be nefarious.
Very interesting choice of words. Yeah, I'm a fan of many things that come from New Age philosophy. I think that it, for many people, is quite liberating.
Mm.
But I have always been immediately deeply concerned with the idea that there is no such thing as evil. And that scares me more than evil does. Like, if you don't think it exists, you use the word nefarious, then it's very easy for it to trick you into thinking that it's actually good.
Yeah.
And I don't like that at all. It gives me the jitters so
There
bad.
was some folks there would say to me, "Ah, there's no such thing as this, no such thing as that."
Mm.
I would often smile and I say, because I go to India, the jungles in India, and don't see a tiger, doesn't mean there are no tigers.
Right.
So I just leave it at that, and
Mm.
we part ways and go about our business.
Mm. So you've arguably put yourself in a lot more scary situations than just taking DMT and trusting what they say. You've
Oh,
walked right into the lion's den in many situations, sometimes on camera, and I assume most not. So you can share with us some of that.
there's a lot of the times, sometimes there's some people who come to you that need help, and sometimes you have to be able to walk into that darkness and
Mm.
pull back from it. But you can't become a target either. And I know a lot of folks that will jump into every battle that comes along, but you got to pick your fights and be careful, because not only do we see folks who need the help, but after they receive the help, within 2 to 3 weeks, they're back to where they started from, because there's this unusual uh, relationship that develops. There's a subconscious relationship. And we see, even with the likes of haunted houses and things like that, and you'll hear people of the faith, of all different faiths, talking about their works within the likes of exorcism and things like that. If the people don't let that link drop, if they don't disconnect that link from the phenomenon, it's going to come back. And there's nothing we can do to break that. That's up to the person, and they need to take responsibility for that. We can't do that. And there's an old saying, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. And this is, it's very true for this instance as well. But yeah, we've had our experiences within the show of various different things that went on. But at the same time, I've had my most startling and life-changing experiences away from the cameras. I thought, I mentioned it earlier. One of those was the Island of the Dead, when we were investigating this location on a desolate lake in the middle of Ireland, and this island was originally was this place of oracle, where you came to and you confronted your demons, and you had your experience. It became known as St. Patrick's Purgatory. And, like many stories in Ireland, we hear them go, "Oh yeah, there's the old storytellers at it again." We weren't prepared for what we were about to experience, because we arrived in daytime on this little island. The church, for all intents and purposes, told us there's nothing on the island. Those old texts, they're all wrong. And we said, well, how do you explain this old map that shows all this detail? Oh, there's nothing there. There's nothing there. And what we were able to see is that over the course of time, the church took control of that particular island. They tried to use it and couldn't. And they couldn't control it. But they duplicated what was on the island on a secondary island on the same lake. So even today, you can go to that secondary island and go around and do your thing. That's the safe zone. We weren't interested in that one. We wanted to go to the original. And that one scared the absolute living hell clean out of me. And it was the energies that were involved with it. It's much more enhanced, much more focused. And your fear can be very much in your head, but this was a total body immersion into this. And this effectively was one of those doorways that we had been talking about. and it was leaching through onto the landscape from a particular doorway, a stone mound that had been severely damaged, and it was clear that there was something very, very wrong here. But that's where a lot of our ancient Irish stories of serpents come from, because maybe the viewers don't know, but Ireland never had serpents.
Right.
But we did have stories of giant snakes. Well, where were they coming from? These gatekeepers to the other realm were the purveyors of knowledge. And if you knew how to tap into that, you used the stone mounds, these ancient mounds dedicated to sun worship and serpent worship, is where you gained your knowledge. And looking at the biblical context, you can see that from our standpoint, we would have been using, so the female, of course, she would have been sitting at the head within these ancient chambers, and with a combination of the sun, harmonics, and also particular chemicals that were being consumed, that this allowed the communication with these serpents, these gatekeepers who relayed the information. Now, these ancient chambers, before I move on to those, that's where we can see this aspect of this serpent of wisdom being alienated within modern contexts, and the association with the feminine, and those two unities there became very opposing within the modern church. So that in itself was one thing, but the ancient chambers, it was remarkable what they were doing, because these chambers, from an Irish perspective, from the DNA analysis that we find within the remains of people in Northern Ireland, is that they were coming from Syria and Iraq during this move across Europe. They went into across the Mediterranean, up into the northern Nordic countries, and then down and through Scotland and into Ireland, and they brought this technology with them. And we can see that the likes of the some of the wall art that was recovered from Babylon, Akkadian wall art, we can see that there's these huge sculptures of deities that have wings.
Right.
Now, the wings are also the wings are used to define that these are spiritual. They're on the other side. So, and these deities, they can have heads of birds or whatever the case may be, but they're handing over this fruit to the priest or the deity, or sorry, the priest or the shaman. But we never were too sure what the fruit was. But I believe we've secured what it is, and the tree itself drops the fruit every 4 years, and it drops it on the summer solstice. Again, we're now associating with the sun. And when the sun enters the chamber at sunset or dawn, it enters at a time when the atmosphere filters out the majority of the other spectrums. So we're getting this pure light that's entering the chamber, and using not only this style of Mongolian chant. We find that through work from the likes of the university there in New York. I can't remember the name of the university offhand, but they'd done some tests, acoustical tests within our chambers, and found that the majority of them were all attuned to 110 hertz. So very advanced for its time, at least we think so. So you've got all this combination going on, plus you also have the fruit, and the fruit itself, when consumed, creates this sense of being half in your body and half out. It's a very, very bizarre feeling. The taste is like nothing else. It's very citrusy and turns the water pink, a bright, almost like a fluorescent pink.
Right.
And it's quite the thing. And we see all over a lot of the Celtic countries this connection to the serpents, the water and the rocks. And even now, even on our landscape, we've still got names associated to giant serpents. Like for Ireland, ours were referred to as pisht. And you've got the Pisht hole in a river nearby me here, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there's still that old association with the giant serpents and how they can kill you, which later evolved into dragons, as what we know today.
Right. And it's interesting you mentioned the people coming from, the Middle East, Syria, Iraq.
Mm-hmm.
I remember in Snorri Sturluson's account of the Poetic Eddas, and in his case, the Prose Eddas, he mentions that Odin comes to Scandinavia from Turkey specifically,
Mm-hmm.
bringing all of this, all of the stories and all of the myths
Yeah.
that are associated with that. And potentially also just like a record of like, where did we, come from? Obviously everyone came from, well, I say obviously, but everyone came from Africa and then the Middle East and then spread out a lot across the entire world, bringing whatever they brought with them. And then years and years and years of stories and such change over time.
Well, I got to a certain stage in Ireland where there was a new lineage that moved in, and we associate that with the coming of the new gods, which were known as the Tuatha Dé Danann. And of course, they're associated with the worship of the sun, Lugh, who was the sun god, and all of that. But what we see within our lineage, and this is highly controversial, DNA analysis that shows that the people who were building the passage chambers and that lineage, all the male lineage were wiped out. And so this new folks coming in obliterated who was there before. And that left us with an unknowing of the chambers. What are these chambers used for? And that's where we can see the change that happened over generation over generation over generation, trying to understand what were these blasted chambers for? What were they doing with them? So we're relearning that. So it's been a unique trip to now, I have to say.
Yeah, there's a lot of very interesting architecture across Ireland in general. The Celts seemed to be quite open-minded when it came to a new culture coming in with a new thing. You see statue of Apollo right next to a statue of Brigg, for instance.
Yeah.
I'm curious from your standpoint, like how do you feel about a lot of the people who are doing work on neo-Druidism and trying to uncover what that was all about?
I let them crack on.
Mm.
It's entirely up to themselves. That's what they want to do. Crack on with it. But it's very, very difficult. A lot of the Druid history, for the most part, was not written down because it was frowned upon.
Right.
But of course, with the new religion that came into Ireland, you got a lot of the Druids crossing over into the Celtic church. And along with that, a lot of the secrets were hidden within the texts. Unfortunately, a lot of those texts also suffered to lightning strikes and everything else, and a lot of them burned, and all of that. And then the church came along, after Rome wanted to seize power, and a lot of those ancient texts again were burned in fire and things like that. So there's a huge amount that is lost, and we have to try and filter through it to get back for what we have left, to understand who these people were, what were they doing. Unfortunately, it wasn't the Druids didn't have a great success in Wales whenever they were pushed back into Holyhead and by the Romans, and then totally decimated and wiped out. They became extinct in the UK, which was unfortunate for them. But in Ireland, even the practice of witchcraft in Ireland was different. There was very, very little there was very little people were killed in Ireland for the practice of witchcraft,
Mhm.
where England, Scotland, and Wales were completely different.
Yeah.
And never mind mainland Europe, my God, they just went completely berserk there. And I know that during the Inquisition, like there was German crowds that were moving into villages, and by the time they left, there wasn't a single female left alive. Hey, where's the sense in that? It makes no sense whatsoever. It's just unbelievable, the mindset that they had. And I think it was the French who had killed, were also killed, I think it was something like 30,000 people from, because they believed that they were werewolves as well. And then you've got of course, the vampire um, epidemic that came on after that. But Ireland has its vampire graves too. But ours are further back than that. We're looking at the 12th century and things like that for the vampire graves. And I was working with American archaeologists there several years ago. We were working on this little tiny island on this magical lake, and I knew that there was the history of the island went way back, and when you've got people, the leaders of Ireland, along with the leaders of the Golden Dawn, arriving at this island, pleading with the owners, can we have the island? Obviously there was more value to it than what they were letting on.
Right.
And this is something I was trying to get to the base of with the archaeologists as they were digging up the island. But one of those archaeologists was also responsible for digging up the vampire graves at the other side of the lake.
It's amazing that Himmler didn't make a play for it, considering all of his other many
Well, it's true. Yeah.
endeavors into such thing. Yeah.
Yeah. But no, they never made it to here. So who knows what would have happened after that if he had. But yeah, so it's Ireland has a long history, convoluted, but there's a very deep running esoteric paths that open up within Ireland that will take you in many different directions. The Fae and the Fairy being one of them. But this idea of the fairy, we think of Tinkerbell and all the rest. Disney, we've got to thank for that. That's not the case. That is not what we see, and certainly from an Irish perspective, they're called the She, and the She in itself was a term that was also denoted to identify the ancient passage chambers,
right,
that were built before the Great Pyramids of Giza. So when we talk of the She, we're talking of the people who come through those mounds onto the surface. So we're now starting to look at the same phenomena, but just interpreted differently.
Right.
And sometimes those masks, sometimes we can give the masks. And I definitely see that culturally around the world, there are great distinctions to be made. But at the core of a lot of these encounters that people have, the phenomena remains the same. And in particular, it's very interesting that when we look at the way the phenomena interacts with us, that's how we can track it back through time, because that remains the same. The way that they appear to us always changes. Sometimes 2 or 3 times in a generation, that can change. The appearance can change. And but when you strip it back and you start tracking it by the phenomena, that's whenever you start to see, wait a minute, why are the grey aliens that we're encountering now doing the same as the fairy 200 years ago? We've still got people and animals that are being mutilated and everything else, but the finger was being pointed 200 years ago to the fairy who were doing that. And you go back further and further and further, and the images change, but the phenomena remains the same. So that's how we were able to track it. That's where the key lay.
Very interesting. Do you guys? I know that you've done quite a lot of work with UAP, extraterrestrial stuff as well, but do you sort of tie them all together? Do you think it's all one phenomena, sort of connected?
If it was left to me, I would say yes. It's the same. It's the same, because the likes of you've got these, and I'm not getting into the the psychiatric terminology and things like that. I'm just going to look at the bare bones of the night attack, where you've got this phenomenon comes into the room, our bodies activate, we can't come out of that sleep properly, we're shut down, and we have this encounter. This is also something that happens when our iron levels plummet. 9 times out of 10, they attack women more so than men. And that's because of the iron within the system. They wait until the women enter their monthly cycle before they start pouncing and preying on their victims. The Greys are doing the very same thing. The Greys, the Jinn, the Fairy, all of them are all afraid of iron. If iron is in the presence of the person, they will not attack. Why do all of these entities, if they're all independent, how is it that even from across the gulf of space that we've got beings that are afraid of the same element?
A very common element, nonetheless.
Very common element.
Yeah.
So that was something to see. But the aspect of iron doesn't work when we remove it from the atmosphere, as in on the surface, like the interaction with ultraviolet light. When you go underground, it doesn't work. You are in a totally different field there altogether. I don't even know. Now, I've been in many caves. I've been after this phenomenon and all the rest. I don't know what our defense would be once we're down under and in their territory and out of the range of the sun or the atmosphere, because the ultraviolet light, of course, goes around the atmosphere, even at night. But yeah, so folks will say to me, well, what can I do if something is happening within my home? Well, if it truly is the phenomena, and this is a big thing to recognize, that not everything that goes bump in your house at night is a ghost. Not everything you see in the night sky that flashes is a UFO. The encounters of this phenomenon is exceptionally small, but at least now we know how to defend ourselves against it. And especially with oppression and things like that, we can see, okay, there are other elements that we should also entertain as well, such as EPA, DHA, which really work exceptionally effectively with the brain, and which is available through omega-3. Not omega-6, omega-3. The two of them should never be combined. And omega-3 gets into the system in 15 minutes and closes the door on that early oppressive nature of that particular encounter. And it's very, very effective. So what we eat reflects on how we can dance through the phenomenon.
Yeah, it's very interesting. There are a lot of spiritually prescribed diets there all throughout history, different cultures, where it's like don't put this into your body, and then there's no like medically ascertainable reason why. That might be it could be to prevent you from getting trichinosis or something, but it could be something that's like this is meant to protect you.
Well, the thing is, Tyler, if you remove iron from your diet, especially if you're fasting, and the iron is removed, then that can open you up to communication.
Do you think that this is why there's a tradition of fasting when people are going into?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Fasting is to remove certain elements and minerals from, but you got to get them addressed once you're finished.
Right.
Get back to normal and close the door to it.
Very interesting. So do you believe that if say like if you go underground, right, and the iron no longer works, is this maybe a reaction to do with iron? Like if iron is, I don't know, exposed to sunlight or rust, could it be some derivative thing associated with iron instead of just the iron itself?
It's oxidization.
Okay.
It's the oxidization of the iron that terrifies them.
Okay.
It has some type of detrimental effect on them when they materialize. It will not do a damn thing until it materializes. So it's during that element of materialization that they are petrified of iron being in the presence of them. And so it's, and that's something that I saw at face value. You know, I got to see it for myself, the effects of that. And I've been in many, many different situations. You know, I was out there in the high desert in California, and
Beautiful.
oh, it was absolutely wonderful, wonderful out there. But we were at an event. I can't remember which event it was, but I remember that there was people out trying to experience the CE5 moment, going through the meditation and stuff.
They're doing it on cruise ships now too. But,
Oh yeah.
yeah.
But before we arrived, we had already consulted our satellite data, so we knew where we needed to be. And we stepped through these people and get into our cars, and we headed up into the high desert. And there was about 10 of us there that particular evening. We arrived up. It was a canyon with just one road in, and that was it. You know, to get back out of it, you had to turn around again and leave. But my wife never gets to experience anything. I don't know why. I never really fully found out.
Is she skeptical?
I think she questions a lot, and I think the phenomena does not like that.
I'm always annoyed by people who dismiss things on the basis of the Tinkerbell effect. Who are like, well, if you don't believe it, then you can't see it, and there, you know, that doesn't prove anything. But I mean,
Yeah.
there's the same people will use terms like quantum physics or observer bias, and I'm like, what's the difference? You know, like
Don't get me wrong. She is, you know, she's been with me, and she's seen things happen that she can't explain. But whenever it comes for her to have her experience, no, she will have nothing. And that night, whenever we were heading up into the high desert, migraine set in, and she ended up being under a blanket in the back of the bus, and couldn't. She was completely zoned out of it. And we went outside, and I remember a lot of the folks that were there, they were standing around with their cameras in their hand and waiting for this manifestation to occur. And I said, folks, put those cameras away. It will not manifest in front of that camera. And the moment they did, that's whenever the hair went up the back of my neck, and I said, okay, it's here now. And just over the tops of the vehicles, this light just exploded. And it was like a welder's gun, a huge welder's gun with the brightest of white light I've ever seen. Boom, 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 over the top of the car. It reminded me of that film, Encounters of the Third Kind.
right.
And the people were there watching it. Now, I had seen this before, and I was listening to my inner voice, that instinct, the gift of discernment to what was going on. I was analyzing the area and what was going on around us, while everyone else was being focused on the light. And I remember there's one lady there from England, and I don't mean to be crude, but she stood there, and all she could do was look at this light going. And when it was over, it lasted for about 90 seconds. And when it was over, this thing headed off. And I said, right, back in the vans, we're out of here. And she was saying, but I've often heard tell of this, but I've never seen it before. That was absolutely amazing. Why are we leaving? We have to stay. We want more. And I said, no, you don't.
No, you don't.
That's it. You're done. We're out of here. And she said, but why? Because they're already here. You didn't see them. And we need to leave. We need to leave now. And I have to say that that coming back to Ireland after that particular encounter, it took me about 7 months before I went back outside again to sit in my backyard and just look up at the stars. I had no wish to connect to anything. And that was it for then. And I said to her, so, and the other folks in the bus, I said, when you were having your experience, the hair stood up in the back of your neck. You were having your experience. Your body was activating. Your adrenaline had been released, and yet you didn't listen to it.
Hmm.
And they said, what do you mean? I said, your body got you ready to move because it had picked up that it didn't like what it was seeing. And I said, and you didn't listen. That's what we need to connect back into. That gift of discernment, because if your body doesn't react to the phenomena, you're fine. Everything's going to be okay. But that phenomena can appear in many multifaceted ways. And if your body kicks in and reacts, you've got 20 seconds to listen to that. It's the 20-second rule. If your body kicks in and your fight or flight is activated, that's telling you, get the hell out of here, because it's not right. And so it's a very important tool that I definitely promote folks to listen to. And that'll go a long way for folks to have their encounters, safe encounters.
It's very interesting because there's such a high percentage of people whose first instinct is that I want to go deeper. I want to know more. I need to understand this, but
that's after the 20 seconds.
Right.
Because the initial first 20 seconds, if you question folks, say you make a slight change in your questioning now, folks, when they're having their encounters, did you experience fear within the first 20 seconds? That's your key. That is the first 20 seconds. And that's them being told, get the hell out of here. Because after that, what we tend to see happens is that the brain pattern starts moving into the theta.
Mhm.
And that then becomes problematic because you can get images planted, you can get false memory, all of that can start being incorporated within that particular thought process. And that comes after the 20 seconds.
So how do you corroborate that? Do you have you tested someone with an EKG?
Yeah. That's already been done,
Right.
especially in what's it called, Histalen in Norway.
Mm.
That when the phenomenon was happening in Histalen, the scientists were reacting, but they weren't understanding why. So that's a big thing to understand and plug ourselves back in to what we have the capability to do, because that helps us again weave our way through this phenomenon for a better encounter.
It's odd because we have this idea that these things shy away from cameras, like they don't want to be photographed, but with other sensors they seem to not be aware or concerned with being detected, and that is interesting. Are you only detecting like evidence left over from the artifact of this happening, or is it something more like they just don't give a shit if you if you catch them on an EKG or if you catch them in some other way? Like if you can record their voice, right? But
that information is coming through us. It's not coming through them.
Right.
The brain patterns is ours. It's not theirs. And we're reacting to the stimulus. So that's a very important thing to differentiate. Now, in regards to cameras, the majority of the times they will not appear to a camera because the camera cannot be manipulated. We can be manipulated. The conscious brain after 20 seconds can be manipulated. They can make you see what they want you to see.
Right. Like a Jedi mind trick.
That's why you can have 3 people looking at a UFO and 3 of them see 3 different things.
Can you give an example?
There have been many encounters of people, say for instance, UFO, where they're standing beside each other, and they're all looking up at it. But if you and this has been done, if you give them a pen and a piece of paper, they're drawing different things of what they saw. There was a lady in California that I was talking to, and she was saying that this particular craft that she was seeing was covered in pipes. It was very, very weird. The pipes that were surrounding it. Yet her relative that was standing beside her said, "I didn't see pipes. That's not what I saw." So again, it's about getting into the conscious reality of the person and manipulating that. In Sweden, I'm aware of a guy that was out walking one day in the forest and came to this walkway, a wooden platform across water, a stretch of water. He got halfway across the water, and all of a sudden this craft came in around the back of the mountain, and he was looking at us straight on. Now, in that particular moment, something that he didn't really talk about, in that particular moment, he got down onto his knees because he was terrified. And he wet himself. He just couldn't handle it. And he didn't want to admit to this. But that in itself was his first clues of the phenomena, of the nature of the phenomena. And many times that UFO is not there. It's just simply not there. It's just a projection. And this is where interacting with the phenomena can get very, very difficult, because again, it's a mask. We have to be able to strip away the mask to say, okay, that's not coming from there. That's coming from somewhere else. Where is this coming from and why? You'll tend to find that a lot of folks who have encounters with this phenomena have a history of it, and the family have a history of it. It'll follow particular lines, lineages, whether it be the father's line or the mother's line, grandmother. But that's something to examine as well. So there we go.
It's just very confusing, and through the nature of it, like if you're trying to discern through deductive reasoning, all we have is the data to go off of like how do people react to it in different ways, and then try to figure out what it is from that. I don't even think Sherlock Holmes could figure this out. So, what have been like the more common things that you've noticed based on, okay, this person saw pipes, this person didn't see pipes? Is the commonality that they did see a flying object? Do you think that they did see a flying object, or did they, was it a shared experience put into both of their brains that they saw anything at all?
Well, I was speaking to Jacques Vallée, and he was saying once about this particular woman who was driving a Renault Espace, which is a huge people carrier in France. And it has a glass roof, full glass roof. And as they were driving along the freeway, I think they were heading toward the German border, he tells the story of this massive triangle just lower itself down out of the clouds.
Right.
And she was absolutely flabbergasted, but mind you, she was doing 60, 70 miles per hour. She grabbed the hold of the cell phone and threw it to the son in the back seat and said, "Film that." And they filmed it. And whenever they reviewed the footage, whenever they got back, because the son was in awe as well from seeing this craft. But whenever they reviewed the footage on the camera, it was just a small speck of light.
Right.
That had nipped down from behind the clouds. So again, that's about the perception that we interpret it and how it wishes to be interpreted. I've been in a situation on top of mountains where I've had my interaction with the she, and I've been able to photograph them, but I understood at that particular moment in time I was being allowed to photograph them to let me understand how the phenomena interacted with us.
Right.
Because initially I was seeing two walking side by side beside each other, like they were just the same normal height as you and me, but one was slightly smaller, wearing a different colored jacket. Yet when I took the photograph, there was only one. So I understood the camera can't be manipulated. It's the us that could be manipulated. So we have to be very, very cognizant and question everything that comes along. But there we go. That's how I've got to here. I'm working with Project Doorway and going on our expeditions and things to try and understand the phenomena, try to break it down and look at its weaknesses, because we've got lots of it too. We've got lots of weaknesses. And it's not to go to war with it. It's just to create a balanced playing field. I find more times than not, though, Tyler, that when we are in a situation where we can establish communication, it will not communicate, because we are ready for communicating and we know what it can do. So it will not join us. There have been instances where we have had successful communication and we're able to learn some things from that. But more times than not, those are rare to the other instances.
You're listening to KEEP in the Keep. Whatever happened to the good old days, when computer role-playing games spent more time telling great stories than stressing you out with season passes and needless grinding? Call of Seregnar is our effort to bring back the best in RPGs. Play in the immersive world as two friends adventure into a murder mystery that lands them in the middle of a battle between gods. Head over to callofseregnar.com. That's call of SAREGNAR.com for more info. And be sure to wishlist on Steam.
You talked earlier about saving kids from the PlayStations and the Xboxes and stuff. And as a game designer, what is your concern?
I feel that as a race, we are becoming more and more detached from the country in which we grew up on. And I see it even with folks that do go out for long walks within the forest or across the hills or whatever, but they stick in earbuds into their ears and they disconnect from what's actually around us.
Right.
And, you know, we live in this reality and it's absolutely beautiful if we can see it. And I think we spend enough time trying to hunt for, another reality, wearing a pair of, these, whatever they're called, the glasses.
Mm-hmm. VR goggles.
VR glasses, yeah. And it was about getting people back to the countryside, because we live now in an environment in which it's quite easy to see where our land can be robbed from us, and destructive things can be done. And if we become so detached from the land, then why should we care about what big corporation comes along and decides, well, we're going to destroy that particular piece of landscape because we want the lithium out of the ground, or whatever the case may be. I think things can be managed much better than that. And I think it's vital that we reconnect to the planet that we live on. Not in a new agey type of thing. I'm not saying anything like that. I'm just saying that we need to connect back to the land that we're connected, or we were born onto, or obviously there's people that are coming here that were not born here, but I think it's important that we connect to the land. I see the struggles that the farming communities have now, and they have a struggle, a real struggle, and they're going to become extinct, and my heart breaks for them. But at the same time, if I want to walk across land outside, I would have a farmer there saying, "It's my land. Get off my land." Well, if I'm not allowed to connect to that land, why should I care what happens to the land? I think there's something there that needs to be worked out. In Scotland, they have a great thing, and it's the right to roam. So we can walk anywhere. Not within 100 feet of someone's property, of course. You don't want to be walking past someone's front window and looking into their house. I don't mean that, but it's a case of, if you want to walk across from point A to point B, you can do that in Scotland, and no one can say anything to you. Where here, there's a problem about that. So if the farmers want me to take on their fight for existence, the fight to manage the land and everything else, then let me on the land, let me access it, and connect to it. It's vitally important, and we have to get away from this mindset. It's mine. I think we need to stop that. We're caretakers of the land. The land owns us. It's not the other way around. Yeah. So I think it's important that we get our children back onto the landscape, back into the forests,
Right.
back onto the lakes, back onto the grass, so to speak. There is a time and a place for for PlayStations and Xboxes, and I have some downstairs that I would sometimes stumble into. I'm a great supporter of GTA 5, and stuff like that. But I also am very cognizant of taking the dog and going over the mountains nearby the house. So that would be my main concern, my main drive, and let them experience the landscape in all its multifacets. And because there are things in the landscape that we think, oh, that's an old wives' tale. That's nonsense. No, there are things out there that's still there. That's still there. It's us that have become detached to it. So yeah, so that's where I would be coming from.
Going into other people's properties in America is pretty scary. I grew up in
Yeah. I imagine you could get shot.
yeah, man, this is very real. I have been shot at. Trust me. If trying to venture around, and sometimes even just getting too close. Like, yeah, I'm not even on your property. I'm just like walking by. But yeah, I think there's a potentially natural human instinct to assume anything out of the ordinary is potentially dangerous, and better safe than sorry is what people always say. That kind of stuff. But it's
whenever I was in the States, we were in Arkansas,
yeah.
and fabulous, beautiful country. But I was so disheartened because we had selected this particular area because of the satellite data, and we knew in our hearts and our guts the phenomenon is here. But we had to be out of the park by 10 o'clock at night. What? No, that's not right.
all but the proper hours for sort of what you said.
Yeah. And I can go up onto, and I have done. I've spent the night beside the ancient tombs on the hillside here. And I've got access 365 days a year. And there's no one there to say, no, you can't do this. And I think that was important for me, certainly writing the book Legend Seekers, to have my encounters up there and see what the hell's going on here. And we were at one of these doorways, um, and it's just a hole in the ground that leads into this underground cave system. And the camera was there with us. It was rolling. I was doing an interview at the time, and it was interesting that when we went back and looked at the footage, that as we were doing the interview, I stopped and turned and looked in the direction. And then moments later, this female voice echoed out of the chamber,
Right.
using an accent or using a language that we don't know what the hell that was. I didn't recognize any of the signals, but it was the fact that I obviously had picked up on something was about to happen because I turned and looked in the direction before it actually occurred. But again, you got to be in these locations for it to happen, and for a lot of the time. But then, of course, there are people that will phenomenal will appear in their homes and all the rest. But those are rare occasions.
When you're looking at this satellite data and trying to find a specific location, what are the tools and the data that you're specifically looking for? I know a thing or two about them. So
it's magnetic. It's the magnetics, ground magnetics. So when you have strong magnetic pockets, whether they be positive or negative, there are slightly different traits of the phenomena that you find in either side. But for the most part, it's the same phenomenon. It's two faces of the same coin that we're looking at. And like I said at the very beginning, you've got ufology, you've got cryptids, You've got paranormal phenomena, you've got disappearances and all the rest. You'll find all of that within the positive magnetic anomalies. But it's the negative ones that I'm intrigued about as well. Because initially, whenever we started delving into the negative magnetic anomalies, we started seeing that a lot of our ancient ancestors were worshipping there. They formed these little pockets where these standing stones or whatever was happening. There were places where there was a lot of natural sacrifice that was going on, whether that be animal or people or whatever. But we also discovered that 75% of the world's top suicide locations also appear in negative magnetic anomalies. So there was something there that seemed to be calling these people to this location. So there was a long history with that type of thing, especially with the spilling of blood. These areas seem to have attracted. Europe, for God's sake, is one huge bloody negative magnetic anomaly. If you look at the last 2 world wars that happened there, it seeps into the land. But we also discovered as well that when you consider the idea of a standing stone circle, and someone, creating this sacrificial offering to the gods, this one person. But now you've got we live in a society now where we have got 70% of the world's weapons manufacturing also appear in negative magnetic anomaly. Weapons development and testing and everything else is happening in those key areas. And you think, well, maybe the old sacrifice hasn't gone away. Whenever you consider, the result of those weapons and who loses their lives and all the rest of either side, it's a case of blood going onto the land.
Yeah, we think of ourselves as so evolved past human sacrifice, like all this ancient thing. Like we do it every day. We just do it in mass numbers so that
Yeah.
it's a statistic instead of a singular
Exactly.
sacrifice.
And seeing that this idea of connecting to what's on the other side, there's quite a line that leads back to a lot of these big companies, and trying to make connections with stuff on the other side. So
Neil Gaiman wrote a novel called American Gods, where all of the ancient gods are replaced by modern American brands, and the idea of these huge corporations that are actually functioning as in the same way that a god would have in ancient times. So that all of your attention goes to it. You sacrifice a certain amount of money to it every so often. You do what it tells you to do, not what you paying it to do. All that.
I think it's whenever we go back and we reflect on how we approached God, for instance, the idea that and you don't have to go back too far within the big book to see Cain and Abel. And Cain slogged in the fields, and he worked very, very hard and gave his offering of fruit and veg to God, but God was attracted by the sweet smell of sacrifice. What does that say? Whenever we consider that, and how, looking at our ancestors, how they were attracting the gods by the sweet smell of sacrifice. The sweet smell of burning flesh attracted God. Should we not be analyzing that? Should we not be going, 1 minute and examine what's coming through? But it is what it is, That's the world we live in, and we have to navigate it.
It is that it is, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I have a few people who have written in, notified them that you would be on the show, and they're like, "Hey, I want to ask." So I'll go through some of this. The first question was, what is the most jarring or unsettling case that you've worked on?
I think it had to be the Island of the Dead.
Okay.
I spoke about that earlier, about going to this island and encountering this aspect of the serpents, and how frightening that was. Being on the cusp of this doorway that I wasn't prepared to face, I wasn't ready for it. And even the dog that was with me, Max, he was a massive cross between a Japanese Akita and a Dutch Shepherd. And he buried his head under my sleeping bag.
Mm.
Initially, everything was fine during daylight. It was at night whenever it started. The signature of the island changed. And I was lying in my tent, and I'm an avid stargazer, as I indicated earlier. But this particular night, I didn't want to go out. And it never dawned on me that the fact that I wanted to stay put, I didn't want to go out through the tent. And that's whenever I noticed this wave that kept traveling from the head to the feet. And it was just, and it continued, it repeated. The dog was burying his head under the sleeping blanket. And my co-author, Cormac, he was further down in one of these pits, because it was the only place we could set a bloody tent up. And he was experiencing something very, very similar. We didn't communicate this until the next day, but it was a terrifying experience, and especially being so close and hearing that pit of something which you could also associate with packed with snakes reminded me of Indiana Jones.
Yeah.
And the Temple of Doom, or whatever it was. But it was terrifying. There was an air with that went beyond the norm. We have fear in this day and age. Fear of maybe being in a car crash, or fear of being in a crossfire, or fear of this. But this was more than that. It was multiplied 100-fold.
It reminds me of Lovecraft and this idea of the fear of the unknown, the things that are so big that they don't even realize that we're even near them. Like, it doesn't matter. We insignificance in the grand cosmic.
To be honest, I don't even have language
right
to describe what I was experiencing. But yeah, I think that was the real big one for me. That really changed my perception.
Understood. The next question was, what is the most factually compelling case you've been a part of?
Oh, well, no. I was intrigued by Vlad Tepes. And for folks at home who wonder who the hell Vlad is, aka Dracula, to go to his castle and have the experience that we did. Now, this is during the time whenever we were filming. We were traveling the world looking for different things. And I remember the steps, 1,624th steps, I think it was, to get to the top, as this castle set on the very top. And that's where we were going to try and make connection with Vlad. Now, people in Romania have a different perspective of Vlad. They see him as a national hero. I don't. I see him as a maniac. He killed 10% of his own population. Never mind what he did to the Ottoman Empire and the invading Turks.
All of the best national heroes are the ones who make the most sacrifices, and
there you go.
That sweet smell that everyone loves.
Yeah. But it was the night before that we were to go to the castle that I had this very vivid encounter with something that woke me from my sleep. And it was a woman who stood in the back of lions, and she was furious that we were going to the castle night. And I was lying there looking at this thing and was like, what on earth is this about? What's happening here? And who is she? And we ended up going to the castle the next evening. We tried everything to reach Vlad. Vlad wasn't there. There was nothing of any essence of Vlad there at all. But I changed my questioning to her. And we got one reply, Class A reply on the audio recorder, and just said, leave now. I said, okay, we're done. and that was it. Now that wasn't reported on the show because how can you even report that? It was left at that. But for 10 years, that sat quietly, and I often wondered about it. Who the hell was she? And Vlad's father, also known as Vlad, he joined this order known as the Order of the Dragon, which its symbol is I think it's called the Ouroboros, which is the serpent eating its own tail.
Right.
And this was a Christian order that was set up Eastern Europe to defend against the invading Ottoman Empire, to defend Christian values. And I should point out that there was a huge amount of European royalty were part of this. But I delved into it further, and it was 10 years later that something came out of the it was the old Babylonian texts that I was working on. And that particular symbol was an ancient esoteric symbol from Babylon. Now, Vlad, of course, and Vlad 1 and 2 and 3 would have been connected with that. They would have understood the old esoteric ways because they were dealing with the Turks and the Middle East for quite some time. But it was this order that used this particular symbol, and they also addressed their dedications to a deity female deity who stood on the back of a lion. So this was an old order of worship that was being carried out under the auspices, possibly, of Christendom by the European elite.
Long-standing tradition of that. Many cases where that is
yeah.
I'm thinking of Knights Templar, etc.
Yeah. For me to stumble onto that was really an eye opener for me, and it was intriguing. I've been back in Romania multiple times, but that country doesn't agree with me, and so I tend to stay away from it as much as I can.
Very interesting. How have your investigations shaped or transformed your perspective on death and mortality?
Well, now, used to be, I thought to myself, oh, it was going to be so simple. We die, we go, and the meat suit is either burned or rots in the ground. But that doesn't seem to be the case. Now this new player in the field, the soul, and looking at the old manuscripts and belief systems from the Nordic communities as well, looking at this aspect of the soul and how that detaches and how that differs from the spirit. The spirit at the point of death is gone. It moves to where it needs to go. But this aspect of the soul lingers for days or weeks before complete detachment, and brings with it the memories, the experiences, to that different location, to this void. And access to the void was through the rocks. And certainly from the Nordic traditions, pre-Christian Nordic traditions, they seen that by bringing the bodies to these places, in part could be islands where these ancient stoneworks were, that when the soul detached from the body, it went through a stage of metempsychosis and turned into a serpent before it entered the stone. And it was interesting to see that whole crossover happen. And suddenly the dots started to connect. And I was in Estonia, and I was looking at the historical islands off the coast of Estonia. And one in particular had this cult that was on it. It was a serpent cult that also used the mountains. And the serpent worship was very evident there, but so was blood worship. And that's all gone now. But it was intriguing to see how and when that was operating in Europe and tracing it back to the Middle East. The mound builders, these places of the Shi, was nothing new within Babylon, but we can go back pre-Babylon to a culture known as the Ubidians. And the Ubidians, there's no written context to them, but we do know that they had a civilization pre-Babylon or pre-Sumeria, and they had mounds. So that's as far as we can go back. So you're looking at around 7,000, 8,000, 9,000 maybe BC in regards to the mounds. And then you start moving, of course, from the Turkish perspective, you start moving into Göbekli Tepe, which was buried in purpose. And again, back to the rocks. But now they've uncovered this new place beside Göbekli Tepe, which is even bigger and older again. So continually, I think we need to write our history books now with pencils, because we're continually having to go back and use the rubbers and the erasers and rewrite history.
There's a long-standing, culture of mound building and serpent worship amongst the ancient Native Americans of the Ohio Valley and
absolutely,
Clovis culture and all that stuff too.
Mm-hmm.
It's all over the world. The same.
Yeah, well, we've seen it moving west, following the sun. Certainly through Europe, and I see it moving into the Americas as well. And it really was a worldwide culture. But they're lost now. We know very little about them. But it is this aspect of the handbag. That was another thing. Actually, this handbag thing that the gods were carrying. We see this handbag also appear. The motif appears in Akkadian wall art from Syria. It appears in Mayan the culture as well, and the handbag itself was carried by the gods, and that's from my work. I can see that is a representation of the mounds. It was a place. It was a receptacle of the soul. The gods carried the bag,
right?
And because there's a temple in I'm trying to remember, Sardinia in the Mediterranean, and there is this massive stone chamber which would have once stood there, but the entrance is still intact, and the entrance itself has a small opening in the bottom, but is carved in the shape of a massive handbag. And so we know that in itself was the place that the souls went, and then became multi-purposed over the course of the years, because we lost sight and lost touch of what they were actually designed to do. People started leaving actual bones into the chambers, where before that's not what it was for. It was for the soul to return to.
Our dear friend Graham Hancock has an entire book where he continually points out this handbag and all these different cultures. And a lot of people are inclined to say it's the Anunnaki, which, even going back to Assyrian, Akkadian, and pre-Babylonian stuff, Sumeria, although no one can really read Sumerian. I hate when people say they can do that. That the idea that there was an eagle and a serpent, who are the two people who were, or entities, whatever they happen to be, that are carrying all this information across the world to humanity. Graham, in his early days, asserted a lot of this had to do with Atlantis, or his whole. There was a society here before we were having a historical record. There are probably several. I mean, we just mentioned the Clovis people. We don't know what happened to these folks. We don't know about their history. We just have little details.
We've lost so much, and we've spent a lot of our time trying to remember. And we are a civilization. I've heard this before. We're a civilization with that forgets.
Amnesia, yeah.
Amnesia, yeah. And it's unfortunate. But for the amount of time that we've been here, we've accomplished so much and lost so much. I think it's these resets, and this is something that I see through history. We go through a sudden reset. And I must admit, since the last escapades of the last 4 or 5 years, that was a term that was coming around, and I think, oh no, don't tell me that. Don't tell me we're in the middle of this damn reset. But who knows? The world's going through big changes at the moment.
Have you been exposed to this phenomena of the telepathy tapes?
No.
It's a very popular recent podcast series where the documentarian, her name is Kai Dickens, has done a lot of research and is asserting that folks who have severe autism and in many cases are non-speakers, as in they cannot communicate, verbally, are actually telepathic, and that the long-standing tradition of medicating these people, all that stuff is hurting them, and that they actually possess gifts that we don't understand yet. And then it points back to a lot of the research, like where a person and their pet, like the dog, starts to react before the owner actually comes home, and these sorts of things. But I guess the ultimate question here is, do you have any insight into what this phenomenon might be?
Certainly my wife and I would share a connection there. We can, we're going day by day, and maybe I say, I'm thinking of my wife, and then suddenly she phones me,
right?
Or vice versa. Or we could be driving down the road, not talking in the car, and suddenly I say something, and she would say, "Well, I was just thinking about that." We share something. I think that type of phenomenon works better with people who you resonate with. It's certainly not going to happen with someone that you hate. But what I have been seeing in some of the work is this: it's the modern take on spiritual encounters. It's now listed as psychosis, and the people. We talked earlier about the 10% of people who have these adverse effects from meditation. They suffer from first I think it's first term psychosis. I think that's the particular term for it. They experience that. Now, if we're to consider that, okay, if we see that spiritual connections or spiritual entanglement is now renamed psychosis, it's also intriguing to see that people who are born deaf don't have a psychotic event. They don't suffer from spiritual intervention. And people who are born blind don't have an experience of psychosis either. So it really does throw the spanner in the works whenever you wonder, well, why? Why do these people not have spiritual encounters? What's going on here? And this is not, I seen this from the medical paperwork, coming from the US, because we certainly wouldn't have that in Europe. So there's a lot of freer thinking within the United States, and venturing into areas that the mainstream Europeans won't. Yet, I got to say, if you're looking for a good seance table, you'll find it in Germany, the core of Europe, which is meant to be all sophisticated with Volkswagens and airplanes and everything else. But no, they still have a very deep underground esoteric practice going on there.
In Europe in general, it generally seems like if you're going to do these sorts of things, you have to be very veiled about it. And it is, as you said, underground. Because there's this really apparent secularism in Europe that is coming from the deep south, like the Bible Belt, and then going to Europe. As soon as I set foot on the ground, I was like, this is amazing. But also you can feel, like, for me, I can feel like there's this much lesser connection in that way. I don't know I don't have the language to describe that other than to say it's like, it's not there. It feels absent. Yeah.
Certainly, if you go to the likes of Scotland, and you go up to the palace, the King's Palace there on top of the volcano, that Edinburgh Castle, you go up there and you go into the chapel or the church in this huge ancient fortification, and it's a place for worshiping the new religion. and yet on all the cardinal points, you've got the old gods.
Mhm.
And you think, they haven't gone away, So, you don't have to look too far before you start finding things like that. But it's not spoken about. And there was a fantastic series of experiments that were conducted in the 1980s. Sorry, in the 1990s, and it was the Skull experiment. And there was a wonderful guy. I can't remember his name offhand now, but he sat in every meeting during the Skull experiments in which they were trying to ascertain and get information from the spiritual realm. So it was this group of mediums that were sitting, and these things started to appear within the seance room, from miniature UFOs that flew around the seance table and small beams of light coming down onto the table. Now, forgive me, but if I was there and this little thing flew around in front of me, that would have been, I would have had it. But because I would be after the proof, I would be wanting, right, here we go. That's it there. But they didn't do that. But what they did do is that they were able to. There were things that had manifested, for instance, such as a newspaper from the 1940s, which showed St. Paul's Cathedral in London, the smoke rising around St. Paul's Cathedral during the bombings of the Nazis. And this paper then was put into a sealed container, and it began to rot very, very quickly. Now they got the paper and print, the ink tested, and it was shown that yes, it's paper from that particular period. The ink is made up of the same ink and chemicals of that period. It's not a modern paper, but it started to degrade quicker for some reason. So there were all these things, this evidence that was coming forward, but he kept diligent notes on what was being given to them, what was being talked about, the information that was being given over. And everything started off well. And I had the diary on my shelf there. And I went through it sitting per sitting per sitting. And everything started off well. But by the time they got to the end, which was 5 years, it had completely turned on its head. And they were now being lied to. And deceit was heavy within that particular series of experiments. And there was also a video camera that was set up. And lo and behold, who appeared in the middle of the seance room was this grey alien. Now, with the hue and everything within the video camera, it came out as Blue. And that's why he became known affectionately as Blue, the alien. What are aliens doing in a seance room? Why are aliens using Ouija boards to contact people? The most basic and rudimentary piece of equipment from something which is exceptionally intelligent and very technologically minded. What on earth are they doing using a Ouija board? Can they not phone us on our cell phones? Can they not give us information on the computers? What's going on? Why are these things appearing in the seance rooms unless we're starting to look at the same phenomena? It's just materializing on a different mask. And again, we started to see this deceit. But the reason that I mention this is that on one of the pages, there is a series of diagonal capital letters, which I thought, that's odd. That's very unusual. What is that about? And I took them and I put them through an anagram decipher, and it gave me the name of a very old family lineage in Austria who have a lot of power within the European Union and steer bureaucracy within Brussels. What is their name appearing within a book that's meant to teach humanity and everything else from the spiritual world? Why did they appear in there? Of all the books that I have and read through, I've never ever seen anything just quite like this appear in the way that it did. And I started to delve into them more, and exceptionally wealthy. But their name gives us a clue. I can't get into it because obviously I can't name them in the open air. But Yeah, it definitely shows why possibly Europe's in the situation it's in at the minute.
So with these wonderfully rich and powerful folks that are pulling the puppet strings behind the scenes, we have plenty of folks who are perfectly happy to go out there and say who they think that they are. And they almost always get kind of slogged down into this state of like, you're crazy, you're just a delusional conspiracy theorist and all that. So some of the best advice my mother ever gave me was like, you'll know who you can and can't talk to and about what you can and can't say,
Yeah.
like because of that, basically that reason. It's like
Mm.
I was terrified that like if I start describing things that I've seen and heard and feel, people will just lock me up in an ivory tower and or
Yeah.
worse, let me roam the earth and just have everyone point and say, dude, that person is insane.
Yeah.
How have you dealt with that?
You're listening to KEEP in the Keep. If you love this show and you love supporting indie video games, please take a moment to check out In the Keep's upcoming Stellar Valkyrie. Built in the GZ Doom engine, this retro first-person shooter puts you in the universe of space bird bounty hunter Falco, who is on a mission to save his ex-girlfriend from the evil Black Star cult. Just type birdgame.space, that's BIRD game.space into your browser. Hit enter, smash the wishlist button, and stay tuned.
I don't annoy myself with them. You know, I'm not out to prove anything. I'm just, I'm doing my thing. It's my path.
Mhm.
I'm walking my path. And if someone asks me, "Have you seen anything? Have you heard anything?" Yeah, this is like we have this conversation. What have I found along the way? And that's that. As far as naysayers go, that's okay. You're allowed your opinion. Although that's disappearing, but we are still allowed our opinions. And but take it or leave it. I don't mind.
Have you like with your books and the topics that you cover and just all of the amazing things that you've done with your UIT courses and all of these meetings that you have, you find that you just seem to generally only attract people who are interested in this stuff from the beginning, or do you get a lot of skeptical, naysaying gyre?
No, there have been a few, of course. I've spoke to a few on podcasts and things like that, and we've had conversations, and especially whenever we start getting into the deep biology of things about how this phenomena can affect us on a biological level, signals for it, and how to counteract that, and everything else. That's what they haven't come across before. That's what they never considered. So, I've said that I'm not out to change their minds, but I'm going to give you my perspective on it. If you ask, I'll give you my perspective. I don't need to be on a platform to say on a soapbox shouting, "This is the way it's going to be." No, like take it or leave it,
Right.
and move along.
Yeah, it's quite interesting how there's like this unlimited amount of knowledge that you could acquire, and then trying to discern between what is and is not, useful information. I think
Yeah.
that's for especially people maybe my age. We have so much access to all of these different things, and it's impossible to even choose.
Yeah.
Like which of these books should I read first, or who should I be following on YouTube or whatever? And it's
Well,
like,
even now, seeing it used to be 10 years ago, you were sent a video and you could say, okay, you could see where it was clearly faked, or if it's real. Now you can't.
right,
Now with AI, we're really struggling, and it's a case now where if I'm sent something, I'll say, look, folks, I really can't comment on this because I have no context. I can't see who's behind the camera. I can't see what's around the camera. You're showing me something which is happening in front of me, and I don't know if that has been created by AI or anything. So we really now need to step up and start analyzing our own stuff because we can't do it.
it's frustrating in many different aspects. So even just in just doing business with someone, like, are you paying someone too much because they're really just hitting a button and
Yeah.
could
Yeah.
generate you, whatever. But I also think that it's almost symbolic of the age that we live in, that we cannot discern reality from falsehood or whatever. But
Mhm.
then you look at the past and it was the same, just with different technology. So just because something is written in a book, of course, does not mean it's true.
Mhm.
Just because someone has a Polaroid photograph of something does not mean that it's real. That speck of dust or whatever is a spirit that they saw. I've Brad Steiger's Real Ghosts, Restless Spirits, and Haunted Places, and he's got all these wonderful photographs. And I don't know, and a lot of them are in black and white. How do I know what that is?
That's it. And for me, if someone sends me a photograph and I have to circle it,
Mm.
well then, folks, we need to
Yeah.
we need to work on our abilities. Because if you have to circle what you think it is, well then it obviously ain't. So, and I find as well, Tyler, that with noise in a photograph, the more unstable someone is, the more likely they are to notice the noise and notice patterns in the noise. And the same goes for EVPs. So it's something to keep in mind about that. And our minds are designed to look for faces in random patterns. So we have to be very cognizant of that. It was something from our ancient caveman past that we look for. So it is what it is.
Oh, I've certainly fallen prey to this myself, where I
Mhm.
find out about something new and then I start seeing it everywhere. And
Yeah. Orbs was a big thing back in the early noughties and things like that. It's orbs were everywhere, and orbs, people were seeing faces in the orbs. But for a long time, it took years and years for information to start filtering through to the top, that the camera manufacturers were actually admitting, no, this is a problem with our technology. It's not a ghost. And the closer that a flash was to the lens, the more likely you were to get orbs.
Right.
And it's just, there's a problem with the digital technology. But when we get an orb that presents its own light, well, then that's something completely different.
right,
Something else.
the more compelling cases of orbs are, the folks that we don't have any light at all. There's no flash photography. We're not carrying a light with us, and we're in a graveyard in the middle of the night, and we see something moving out of the ground and upwards. Like, okay, that seems a little bit more.
Yeah, I was in a castle there in England,
Mm.
and the guy, he thought he was being haunted, but I said, no, I think it's the property itself.
Oh.
And in the basement, my attention kept being drawn to this area within the basement, and one of the arches, it was dug out. Someone had gone at it, and I got the impression that they were looking for something, and it was never answered what. But whenever I asked the curator, I said, "What's the story with that?" And he says, "Oh, we think they were looking for a way through to the main drawing room through that wall." And I thought, that doesn't seem to feel right. But I'm going to set a camera in here anyway, and it was one of our specialized cameras that doesn't produce light; it just enhances the light that's there. And lo and behold, in the middle of the night, this orb presented itself. But not only did it present itself, it produced a light that started searching the hole in the wall. It was looking for something. And I've never seen that before anywhere else. But whenever we started finding places that had esoteric practice or undertones, we tended to see these lights, these orbs presented themselves in various different frequencies, and then they just imploded on themselves and disappeared again. So it was always an intriguing thing to witness.
Yeah, there's a lot of floating orb stuff that goes on here in Appalachia, where people, go out into the mountains, and if you're, there at a certain time, there's just so many, and you can see dozens of them at a time or hundreds of them at a time, and that's hard to knock off when
Yeah.
multiple different people have reported seeing exactly the same thing. But
Yeah.
what it is the question.
Yeah, the certainly from your perspective there, there's the Brown Mountain Lights and things like that.
Yep. Just north.
They're in a positive magnetic anomaly, very strong one.
Right.
And but the amber gamblers, as I call them, they're not to be trifled with. You need to be very, very, have your wits together when they suddenly they're attracted to where you are. You got to get ready. And I had an encounter with them in just outside Phoenix in Arizona.
A place known for its lights.
Yeah, well, yeah, but it freaked me out. My own warning signals were kicking off, saying, "Be careful," because the night before, I was out there looking for them, and they weren't to be seen. And I was a really good vantage point, and I thought, it's all just nonsense. That's all it is. And as I turned to leave and pack up the gear, it appeared. At the very moment that I was ready to leave, suddenly, here's your little bit of dust. Here you go. And the following night, I said, I need to know where that is. We took the directions and everything else, the compass. I said, I need to know what direction that is. We need to see the satellite. Where is this? I want to be closer. So the plan was the following evening to be in the desert and be there. I wanted to be there an hour before it showed itself the night before. I said, okay, now we're going to be set and we'll be set up for this and everything's great. The very moment that we pulled up and my feet literally touched the ground, boom, there they were. It was as if they were waiting, and that made me nervous.
Right.
But I got the photographs, I got the shots and everything else, and they were fantastic shots, but it wasn't a good night.
Sedona is another one of those areas.
I like Sedona.
It's a very beautiful town if you can get past the tourist trap part of it.
Yeah. I like that. And Arkansas was another fantastic place, but it was just getting to the locations was troublesome in Arkansas because we had to be out at a certain time.
Yeah. I lived in Arizona for 4.5 years, and I left Tucson right before the recent UAP thing started happening, and
Right.
I felt so like, oh, why? I'd go out every night looking for this stuff, and it just happens like the next day. But I do find, like what you were talking about earlier, sort of like if you're looking for something, you won't find it, and then you find it when you're least when you don't intend to. So how have you mastered finding things when you intend to find them?
Well, there's a lot of things that we weigh up, and the likes of our Spanish expedition, there were multiple inputs. Like there were at least 7 different inputs that led us to the exact location of where we needed to be, and that included historical, archaeological, eyewitness sightings, what the government were doing, and when they were doing it, and also other evidence from people who lived within the vicinity, what they were experiencing and everything else. So all of those key components all amalgamate to secure the location for us to go to that location. And boy, it paid off wonderfully. Even being able to access, it's important as well when you're using the satellite data, to find. Don't be using Google. Google Earth is great, but those images are all cleaned.
They're also using polar orbiting satellites, as opposed to a geostationary satellite. Yeah.
But find another source of the satellite data, and that's what we did. And there they were on those images. So we says, right, we know we need to be in the right place. And from the west coast of Ireland here, and I see that there's other people now within the States now. There's key areas where the hum is really starting to be heard. And I've heard it now, my God, it's coming on a decade now. I've heard it in the west coast of Ireland. But only recently have we started to hear it now on the east coast.
Mhm.
And that's a new phenomena there. But there's something different about that I can't put my finger on. But I know within the Pyrenees, whenever we were there, one of the mountain guides had said to us, if you want to hear the mountains sing, go to the higher plateau. And I said, what do you mean you hear it sing? He says it hums. And I said, that's the same stuff that we hear over on this side. But it was remarkable. And to see the photographs of manifestations that are appearing, were second to none. This was very, very good. And while we were interviewing and some of the locals, these bloody cylinders were appearing in front of us, going behind the mountain. It was just blew us away. How the phenomenon was happening and all the rest. But anyway, that was the Spanish expedition, and we've got our sights on a few locations now here in Ireland, as well as on the continental US. We want to get over there and follow up.
Have you had instances like this where you find that some of the people in attendance do experience it and others straight up do not?
No. Like I was at a location there in Ireland here where the She were known to appear. And there were people here from the press and the UK press that were staying with us as well. And I believe there was eight that night on the mountain, and we all had our experiences. And even to the point where the doorway opened in front of us, and we got to see a landscape that's not part of this landscape. The trees there were massive. We don't have those trees. And the person that owned the land was there, and she got up to walk through this doorway, which none of the rest of us would have done. And she got sucker punched. And flipped back over the chair that she had just stood from. She wasn't meant to go through that doorway. And these amber gamblers, as I call them, they initially appeared before the doorway opened. And there was everything going on that particular night. And again, the dog was with me, because he was he's excellent at what he did. And also important to consider that, again, tying it back to the rocks and identifying key areas of where they come from, they tend to the phenomena tends to take out the dogs first. And even though these animals can be our canine buddies and all the rest, they can be in danger too in particular areas. And there have been stories about Skinwalker and everything else, and the dogs, security dogs there, but Skinwalker's not what it's played out to be on TV shows and stuff like that. It certainly is a testing facility, but not by what we think it is. But there have been stories of dogs being killed and things like that. And it's not a case of the dogs can sense them. I suspect it's the dogs can smell it. And the dogs, their scent is 10 million times stronger than what we can pick up. And they're detecting the phenomena first by smell. And that's why they took the dogs out, because they're our first line of, what's going on? I was at a location here in Ireland, and it was an old quarry, again, back to the rocks. And historically, people were being pulled out of their beds that lived on the outer fringes of this quarry. They were being pulled out of their beds at night. They abandoned their homes and all the rest. And the guy that opened the quarry on the top of the mountain, he set up a workshop on one side of the yard and the offices on the other. And one of his men was cutting was cutting in the tool shed on a circular saw, a table saw, and he was clubbed in the back of the head, fell forward and took his fingers off. And this figure is being seen walking continually back and forward on the same line from the tool shed into the offices. Now, the staff, they run to try and find who this person is. They get into the offices and he's gone. But during the night, the offices would have been turned upside down, and religious iconography, statues and things like that would be literally smashed and pulverized to powder. That got so bad that they brought in German shepherds as guard dogs, and this phenomena was murdering the dogs. And these were massive dogs. And I arrived up one night to investigate the location, and sure enough, electronic failure, car malfunctions, all this was going on site, and it was the dog that triggered off first. He let me know that there was something in the corner of the tree line that was watching us. I couldn't see it, but he did. He could detect that it was there, and I suspect it was through the smell that he was picking it up in the wind. But a phenomenal case, but nothing we could do about it. That was way beyond my pay grade. I was just there to document. I wasn't there to go hand to hand with it. That's not my deal.
Reminds me of the some people call them Tommy knockers, but cave or mine dwelling.
Kobold. The Germans called them kobold. Yeah.
Right. But they only come out at night when there's no sun around, and they seem to be in places where there's not iron deposits, and they dwell underground, where even if there were, that wouldn't be affecting them. It's very interesting. It's also very common in Appalachia.
Yeah. Well, there's the English have their version of this phenomenon. I think I forget the particular modern term for it. Well, modern medieval term for it. I think it's something like gremlin or something like that.
Gremlins and goblins are usually
goblin. That was it, goblin, and that's derived from the old French, which is gobelin, which in the Germanic is cobalt, and cobalt is in reference to the rock.
Right.
So again, you follow that line back, and you end up back in the rocks.
And the coding language. Now that I think about it.
And the coding language.
Yeah. It's very, and also a coding language used a lot in international banking. I don't know if that has anything to do with it, but in my conspiracy,
well, you mentioned international banking because there was a temple of Mithras was discovered underneath this huge banking tower block in London. And whenever they were going through, the archaeologists removed those ancient stones from this multi-billion-dollar banking system, and moved it somewhere else. I don't know where it went. It went to some museum, held it in storage or something. But the banking corporation wants it back, so they're having to transport the stones back down underneath this huge tower complex. And you wonder why. What is it about, again, the stones? What information are they gaining through the stones for multi-billion-dollar banking?
My big lingering question I try to ask every paranormal investigator type guest this one. What is a shadow person?
Well, to me, a shadow person is the soul. It's the detached element of the soul. And I've seen them in person.
Right.
The best way to see shadow, and this is a good tip. Where do I have it? I don't know. It's here somewhere. But I just can't see it. It's a green light, a green LED. If you have a wall, say this is the wall, and you step back about 2 feet from the wall, and you create your line of green LED, a dull. It doesn't need to be very bright. A dim light, if you like, of LED shining against the wall. Make sure that the light doesn't come back, so block it so that it doesn't affect your vision. The shadow can be seen in particular areas where it feeds off people. Now, this shadow will appear, sometimes they appear massive, 6, 7 feet, 8 feet, 10 feet tall, and sometimes smaller than that. But they will appear not on the wall, but between you and the light. You'll see the shadow. That's the best way to see shadow. You can film them, photograph them as well. But green light is best. The reason for green light is because our eyes are sensitive to movement in the green spectrum. That's the way we're designed.
Right.
So I use the green light to hunt for shadow.
Seeing things against grass and trees and, the
There
natural
you go.
world. Yeah.
Yeah. So shadow works well. Hunting shadow works well with that. So shadow it was part of us. It's that symbiotic connection that detaches, but it has not retracted back. It has stayed here. They're the dangerous one. So, yeah. So that's how we see.
A friend of mine had a dream where he saw the Hat Man walk into his house. And I was like, please stop telling me this story. I don't want to know this. I will never sleep again. Yeah. But have you encountered any cases of this phenomenon? And
the Hat Man, a huge majority of the Hat Man cases are American based. What's the other one?
The Baba Yaga, or the witch that strangles people in their sleep.
No, not Baba Yaga. It wasn't the Hat Man. I can't remember. It was another one that was created. They're creations, and the phenomena utilizes the creation and appears with those masks. But Slenderman, that was it.
Slenderman, the video game series was a phenomenon.
Is a creation. It's a thought creation, which can be manipulated by the phenomena itself,
right?
And appear in those things. Baba Yaga, of course, is not is just a step away from the incubus succubus, which goes way back into prehistory.
Right. That is a very interesting one, and it seems to, as you said, it occurs in so many different cultures over so much time. But like a witch or a woman who is a shadow and strangles people, men usually in their sleep, and people see it. It's terrifying.
Yeah, it can be. And again, whenever you're waking up in those instances, it's how you feel in that moment. Is it scaring you? Then you've got a good reason to be afraid.
Right.
And it's not attacking physically. This is something we should address. It's the spiritual aspect or the soul aspect. It's targeting the soul of the person. It's not targeting the physical. Now, because it's so traumatic, these things can manifest. Scars, marks, and all of that can manifest just the same as stigmata. Can happen to the faithful. It can be traumatic, and that can manifest into the physical. But initially, they target the soul. That's what they need to move. They need to move that aside before they can take the body. And he who owns the body wins.
Why do they want our bodies? And
because the shadow has not retracted back. That's the problem. It needs to retract back to the void. Many don't.
Right.
So the ones that don't can't stay here indefinitely. They need the body. That's what oppression is. It's the attack of the shadow. And it needs the body to do that. And to take the body, it needs to remove or step aside the shadow or the soul that's already in that body.
It's very interesting. I heard this theory that, with the body being a vessel, that you should you need to treat it like it would any other thing, any other physical object, and that matter is attracted to the void. Like even in weather, low pressure is quite literally low pressure. It's the reason why you have winds is because things are trying to fill up that space. And so the best protection against something trying to enter your body is to have it occupied with something that you want there, and not something you don't want there. So is that, in your estimation, is that like your own soul, or is that a lighter spirit as opposed to a shadowy spirit, or?
Well, our soul is the shadow. The two of them, that's interchangeable.
Okay.
But this body is got a soul and a shadow, or sorry, a soul and a spirit in it. So when we go through instances of oppression or attack, spiritual attack, is attacking that particular key element. All our ability, psychic ability, comes from the soul. It lies with the seat of the soul. It's not the physical. That's not an element of the physical. When we go through an attack such as that, like Baba Yaga or incubus or succubus, whatever you call it, or an alien abduction, another perfect example. If it's a traumatic experience, what tends to happen is that within days or weeks after that, we start developing these abilities. We become prophetic. We could become, a lot of people will see them as gifts. Oh, it's a gift from the spirit world. It's not. No, it's not. We need to draw that line right now. That is not a gift. That is your soul stepping up to the line to say, I have to try and stop this from happening again. Every psychic ability that we possess, telekinesis, telepathy, all of that lies with the soul. It's the soul's job to maintain that perfect trinity. So you're right. We need to take care of the vessel and look after ourselves. And a lot of folks will say to me, well, going into this, how do you stay aware? And I said, well, you have to stay aware, because going into this, a lot of folks will look at us as the first aider. Well, who gives the first aider first aid? We got to look after ourselves. We got to understand and become smart to what's going on around us with the spiritual world, because it can play us like a fiddle.
Every single time I've ever known anyone to have one of these types of experiences, like my first question is like, what else was going on in your life? And it always happens when you're vulnerable, whether that be the hallucinations associated with withdrawing from drugs or alcohol. Very, very more powerful than any psychedelic experience I can even think of. Like, this is, you're vulnerable and you can be very easily messed with, and hopefully you make it through that journey. It's tough one.
And again, the people that have come to me and said, look, I'm having this experience, and I'll say to them, are you going through a monthly cycle? Did this happen as you were going through a monthly cycle? Yeah. Okay. You need to concentrate on your iron levels. Be aware of those.
It's another thing, especially with alcoholism. Your body is desperately low on vitamin B, and lots of other things too. You're probably also just in general not eating because you're drinking so much. Yeah. Or with psychosis induced by methamphetamine or any amphetamine, cocaine as well. You're not eating as much. You're not taking care of your
fasting. The body's getting robbed of its minerals. And even when during the later stages of oppression, leading into entry into the body, you'll also notice particular patterns in which the person will move away from healthy eating patterns into unhealthy ones. And you'll notice a shift into the likes of fast food and things like that, where it's not nutrient dense minerals and things that we can draw from the food. It's just rubbish. And we see that spiraling down happens as it works on the immune system, making it weaker and weaker and weaker.
Right. This has been one of the more enlightening conversations I've had in a very long time. So I really
thank you, Taylor, and I have thoroughly enjoyed it.
Yeah, and you've been very patient, so thank you for that. A few things before we depart here. Aside from your own, which I will have all of them linked into our show notes in the article that's published with this, but a book that everyone should read.
With the Deceptions of Gods and Men.
Understood. That'll go on my list too.
Yeah, that's an Amazon, and it's also available on audio Amazon audiobooks, and I was given a sample of it. There was one day I was in the forest, and I completely forgot that it was my book, and I was listening to it because I wasn't reading it. Say they got someone else to read it, and I was going through the forest listening to this in my earbuds. Um, and I was thinking, wow, this is absolutely brilliant. These people are well cued in. Whoever wrote it, then I suddenly realized, what the hell are you doing, you fucking idiot? You wrote the book.
That's very funny.
But there we go. But yes, it's there, and that's a very important one, the deceptions of gods and men, because it looks at the deception behind it.
Yeah, regrettably, I haven't actually read any of your books. I've watched like everything you've ever put on YouTube, and which is all really good stuff. But I'd really need to grab that one and dive deep, and then hopefully get the rest as well. So that'll be fun.
And thank you very much.
Who in your mind, or maybe one or two other people that I should have on this show?
Now let me think. You spoke to Nathaniel.
I've not spoken to
Nathaniel Gillis.
Mhm.
He's one you should speak to.
Okay.
He's a demonologist within the United States. Though we've agreed not to use that particular term,
Right.
because of its modern day connotations. And who else would I recommend? There's a few folks there that I can reach out to, and see if they would speak to you, especially from the aspect of spiritual warfare. They would be very on the front line of that particular aspect, if that's someone who you'd be interested to speak to, like Joe Stewart. He does wonderful work, there again in the United States.
Mhm.
I can get him in contact with you if you wish.
If you think of anyone at all, just
Yeah.
you have my email address, and I'd really greatly appreciate it.
Absolutely, no problem. No
We'll
problem.
certainly
Sure.
reach back out to you when I've done more research and maybe read all your
Thank you.
books and go deeper.
No problem.
Um,
That's great.
Do you think you could get Steve Marrow? That'd be really
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I'll reach out to Steve and tell him that you want to speak to him. Steve's a good guy, and he'll certainly help you out.
I really appreciate it, Barry. You've been amazing, and we'll do it again. So
Thank you. No problem, Tyler. You take care. Have a good one.
live long and prosper.
You too. Bye.
Woo! What a wild ride that was. Thank you for tuning in. Thanks for listening. I never thought I'd be talking to Barry Fitzgerald on the podcast, but it happened. Hey, Mom, we did it. If you're out there listening to this and you're wondering, how can I give to such an amazing show? All you have to do is go to inthekeep.com. You can find all kinds of different links on our support page for how to support. You can drop a tip in there. You can buy me a book off my book list. I really appreciate that, actually. Maybe buy me a Barry Fitzgerald book. I think there's several of them on there. And I will reward you for doing so. You can become a Patreon member. We have a few of those, and they're amazing. And I love them a lot. But I also want to implore you to remember that the best way that you can support the show is simply to tell someone else that you know and like how much you like the show and that they should listen to it. And it only takes a couple of seconds to hit that share button, take that link, text it to that person, call them on the phone and say you should totally listen to it, whatever you want to do. Share it on your social media or whatever. I just appreciate it. For real though, I love you. God love you. Stay in the keep. Mwah.
Hi, I'm Ben, host of the Field and Foley podcast. Every episode I sit down with incredible guests, not just sound designers, field recorders or musicians, but experts in everything about audio. We explore the creative process behind the sounds that shape our favorite games, films and experiences. Whether you're an audio professional or just someone who loves great sound, Field and Foley offers deep dives, behind-the-scenes stories, and insights you won't hear anywhere else.